Hi, I'm DIYte. Today's video is video 3 in my How to Paint MDF series. And in today's video I'm going to run through every conceivable way that you could possibly paint the edges on your MDF. And at the end of the video I'm going to conclude which way I think is the best. The reason I'm doing this video is there is a lot of conflicting opinion out there on how best to paint the edges of your MDF. Everyone's got an opinion on the best way to do it, but there are also practical issues. The last video I did showed how to apply wood filler to the end grain, and then somebody validly pointed out in the comments, come on, if you're making a lot of cupboards, you can't possibly do this on every single cupboard. There has to be an easier way. So I've prepared a mock-up representing all the most popular ways that people are talking about on the internet to seal your MDF edges. And this way I can compare each one and work out which one looks best. So this is my mock-up. I've taken 5 pieces of MDF with nice, flat, smooth, planed edges. And we're going to give each of these pieces of MDF a different treatment and see which one does the best job. So first up, we're going to treat this edge with an oil-based undercoat and top coat. One of the concerns that people raise online with painting end grains of MDF with water-based wood primer undercoats or MDF primers is that the water in the paint brings out the end grain. So I'm going to be really interested to see how this solvent-based primer works. Okay, next up I'm using water-based quick dry wood primer undercoat. And I'm going to paint this right next to the edge that I've just painted in the solvent-based undercoat so that we can easily compare the finishes of each. Okay, on our third MDF edge we're going to apply a PVA solution to seal the edge before we prime and top coat. Put a tiny bit of PVA in a jar and then an even smaller amount, literally tiny little dash of water, just to water it down a tiny amount. Okay, next up I'm going to be sealing the edge with my 2-part wood filler. Okay, last up we've got this MDF edging tape which I bought from eBay on the recommendation of Junkyard Genius, who posted a comment below my last video on painting MDF edges. It's 50mm wide. You iron it onto the surface. It's got a sort of adhesive that melts when you iron it. And it comes in 5m, 10m rolls. The 5m roll is about £12, so it's not cheap. Let's see how we get on with this. Right, I don't need it to be this wide, so I'm going to cut it in half so I can spread it across the entire sample piece. Okay, I've got the iron set to a medium heat. I've left a little bit out over the edge and an even amount on both sides, and I'm just now going to iron the edging tape onto the MDF, moving slowly along and applying an even downward pressure. Apparently you know that the glue is melting because a bead of glue comes out underneath the tape. Can't see any signs of that, but it is setting hard. And do one more run. And now with a block of wood, just to make sure it's properly adhering to the surface, I'm just pressing down on the block of wood. I actually had a bit of paint on this block of wood, so it's just rubbed a bit of the paint onto the surface. That looks to be nicely and firmly glued in place. Normally obviously you'd use a full run across your MDF board. In my case I bought these as samples from eBay and they only sent me 2 short pieces, so I've had to join the 2 together. Now all that remains for me to do is to carefully trim off the edges with my Stanley blade. Trimming off the edge is not actually as easy as you'd think. One of the things I'm trying to do in this video is weigh up the pros and cons of every single option. There's a bit of required art. What you don't want to do is trim off too much and get to the actual flat edge of the MDF itself. But I'm not trying to go too close because I can always take off the remainder with some fine grain sandpaper. That's how you get the straight edge. Leave it a little bit proud with your Stanley knife and then trim off the excess with some 120 grade sandpaper, and actually that's coming off pretty easily. Leave me a nice straight edge. Okay, not bad for a first effort. I think I could do a lot better second time around though. I think your technique on the trimming will get better every time you do it. But the benefit of this edging tape is what we're left with now is a beautiful smooth flat edge that we can now prime and top coat for what I already know is going to be a beautiful smooth finish. So the initial preparation's been done on each of the surfaces. Let's have a quick look to see where we're at. Looking first at the end grain that I painted with the oil-based paint, and then at the end grain that's been painted with the water-based paint. I thought there would be a much greater difference in the roughness with the end grain coming through much more on the water-based paint than it did on the oil-based, on the solvent-based paint. But in actual fact, I'm going to be honest with you, yes, there isn't a huge amount of end grain coming through on the edge that we painted with the oil-based paint, but I can also say the same thing for the edge that we painted with the water-based. Zooming right in, this is the oil-based primer. It's reasonably smooth, and this is the water-based primer. Again, it's got not quite as smooth, but it's still pretty good. Moving on to the end grain that we treated with the PVA. Similar finish really, reasonably smooth. The wood filler I've already given a light sanding to because that wouldn't have been smooth until I'd done that. So that's nice and ready now for priming. And then obviously you've got the MDF tape which is also ready for priming. So I'm going to give each of these surfaces a very light sanding. The end grain that we painted with the PVA just needs a quick coat of wood primer undercoat. Now this is the water-based wood primer undercoat, obviously not the oil-based. Now for the end grain I've treated with a wood filler. Finally I'm going to prime the MDF edging tape. Okay, I'm now applying the oil-based top coat to the piece of end grain that we previously painted with the oil-based primer. And I'm finishing off the remainder of the edges with a water-based satin top coat. So, after all that, what's my verdict? So looking at the edges in turn, the results are pretty surprising. The edge painted with the oil-based paint is pretty smooth. You can just see the end grains coming through. But actually, the edge painted with the water-based paint looks very similar. It hasn't quite got the same sheen which you get with the oil-based paint. But from a smoothness point of view, it's almost exactly the same. Moving on to the edge that we treated with the PVA before priming and top coating it. Again, that edge looks almost exactly the same as the two edges we've just looked at. Moving on from the PVA edge to the edge treated with the wood filler. Now this is a lot smoother. This is one of the two standout winners. And in turn, moving from that onto the edge which we've treated with the edging tape. Again, it's so smooth that all you can see on there is the mottling created by the roller when we applied the water-based top coat. So what conclusions can we draw from this? Well, I'd say if you're a professional woodworker who wants to go for a real super smooth finish on the furniture or whatever it is you're making, then either applying the wood filler or the edging tape to the edge of your MDF is probably the way you're going to want to go. But there's a lot of hassle attached with this. So for us average DIYers who just wanted to get a reasonably good finish on the edge of the MDF, I would go for the water-based wood primer undercoat and then the water-based top coat. I wouldn't go with the oil-based because they're increasingly going to be phasing out oil-based paints as time moves on. And don't forget, there's a major hassle factor with cleaning the paintbrushes with thinners after each coat. And I wouldn't either go with the PVA bond because that introduces an extra measure into the process and you can't really tell any difference between that and the other two that have been painted without the PVA. So I really hope you found this video useful today. If you've got any thoughts or comments, please leave them below the video. And if you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here.